Right now, I'm challenging myself to see if I can make 128 Regulation H teams that are each different from one another over the course of 128 days. Why 128, you might ask? At the end of the 128 days, we're going to do something special where we battle every team against each other in a single elimination bracket to see which team emerges on top. There will be some competitively strong teams, there will be some gimmick teams, and there will be some probably a good number of goofs and gaffs in there, so if you want to follow through to the end, subscribe so that you can keep up with each day. But without further ado, let's move on to day 41. Alright everybody, welcome back to another video, and in today's video we are going to be going over an Alolan Raichu Pincurchin team. Now, Pincurchin is the only Pokemon that we have in the format currently with the Electric Surge ability, which allows it to set up electric terrain, and Pincurchin often gets overlooked just because Pincurchin does not have as many advantages as the other terrain setters in the format, or even weather setters in the format. But it is possible to use Pincurchin. You just have to know sort of what you're doing in order to manipulate the other Pokemon on the team in order to benefit from the electric terrain the most. So starting off with our electric terrain benefitters, we have the Alolan Raichu, and Alolan Raichu's ability is Surge Surfer, which means that we will double our speed whenever electric terrain is up. And this is very handy because Raichu is already super fast. You can outspeed a lot of things even inside of if the opponent sets up Tailwind. But with the Alolan Raichu, we're just looking to do good stab damage with our Volt Switch, which will allow us to pivot out after hopefully getting up electric terrain. But we also have the Expanding Force just in case something wants to come in and disrupt our electric terrain, which would be the Psychic terrain. Then we get spread damage on Expanding Force, and the Psychic type damage on Expanding Force is still pretty good, but you could run Psychic if you really wanted to. And we also have the Nuzzle just for some good speed control on Alolan Raichu in case one of our other Pokemon need to not be outsped by something. We can paralyze them with Nuzzle, hopefully. And with the Focus Sash, we'll always be getting a hit, and I really wasn't sure what Terra type to put on the Alolan Raichu. Actually, now that I think about it, Stellar is probably a better type for Alolan Raichu, because the electric damage is... Actually, you know, let's go back to Electric, just because Electric makes you not weak to Dark and Ghost. We're running Terra Electric so that we're not weak to Dark and Ghost like Sucker Punch, and we can maybe live a Sucker Punch. Oh, wait, why am I... I also just changed the EVs because we should be negative attack nature since Nuzzle is our only attacking move. Next up, we got Pincurchin, who, as we mentioned, is going to be our electric terrain setter. And Pincurchin is super slow, actually. You're even slower than Pokemon that are considered to be the slowest, such as Torkoal. So with Pincurchin, you can go for some pretty good stab damage in the Thunderbolt, and then you also have the Scald to perhaps get a chance burn on something, but also having the water type damage is sometimes useful. And we mostly just have Sucker Punch here for breaking opponent focus sashes whenever they want to go for attacks. And you know what, you probably actually could just... You actually definitely should just be running Stellar Terra on Pincurchin, because it's funnier. But also we've EV'd our Pincurchin to be super physical tanky, because hopefully it only will ever have to go up against physical attackers, and we have the Rocky Helmet to make it so that we can damage back those physical attackers whenever they go for a contact move into us. Next up we got Palafin, and since this team is doing a lot of switching, it benefits us to use Palafin, as we can start something like Alolan Raichu and Palafin, and then swap in Pincurchin for Palafin, and then we get electric terrain up, and then Raichu can Volt Switch out, and then on turn 2 we immediately get Hero Form Palafin, which is very nice. And on our Hero Form Palafin, we're going to be running its signature move Jet Punch, which is a 60 base power priority move, which is really good because we're Water Terra, so we want to be doing a lot of water type damage. And we also have the close combat just to hit things like steel types that are pretty popular in the... But whenever that happens, we can also Haze in order to get rid of our defensive drops on Palafin. And Haze is also nice for things like Dondozo, as always. We are Clear Amulet on Palafin, mostly just to avoid getting intimidated, but also to avoid maybe things like Icy Wind speed drops. Next up, we got Politoed, and Politoed is going to be our rain setter on this team, really helping out Palafin, but also we don't really have fire resistances other than Palafin, so it's nice to give everything like a pseudo fire resistance on this team with the rain and help cancel out opponent's suns. But on our Politoed, we're going to be running Weather Ball, which will be Water type and Rain, but if the opponent ever tries to set up the Sun, then we get Fire type Weather Ball, and we are Terra Fire, so it can come up
but we also have the Ice Beam for helping us deal with maybe grass types, for example, and we have that late game Perish Song, which we're not super EV'd on Politoed to be Perish Song, but if we use Alolan Raichu and Palafin to get rid of 2 Pokemon on the field very quickly, we can just Perish Song with Politoed and pretty much win the game there. As well as we're going to be using safety goggles on Politoed, but ideally we never have to worry about getting spored into Politoed because of Pincurchin's electric terrain that will keep everything grounded on the field from falling asleep. But safety goggles is nice to avoid Rage Powder redirection in some cases, so we're going to be using safe goggles on Politoed. It also means that we don't necessarily have to bring Pincurchin every time we see an Amoonguss. And speaking of grass types, we got Sceptile here, and Sceptile is going to be using the Unburden ability, which will double speed whenever we lose our item, and the Electric Seed, which will increase its defense by 1 stage and use up the item, so we can get pretty speedy Salamence right off the bat. And with Acrobatics, we get a super strong flying type move right off the bat, as well as just the good stab Leaf Blade. But we also have the ability to swap out with Shed Tail, which is nice whenever we need like Palafin and Sceptile. Then we can swap in Pincurchin, activate the Electric Seed, Shed Tail ourselves into hero form Palafin, and then just do massive damage with Palafin behind a Shed Tail. And lastly on the team, I decided to slot on Low Kicks, since Low Kicks gives us both good stab, bug, and dark type damage, which this team doesn't really have. And with Tinted Lens, we are going to make any damage that is resisted pretty much neutral as long as it's not being double resisted, which is super good for bug and dark since there's a lot of things that resist both of those. But with the first impression, we can choose to lock in and go for an absolutely devastating +2 priority bug type move, but only on the first turn because we'll have to swap out and we're choice banned, so we don't get to use the first impression again. We'll just be forced to struggle. But we also have the U-turn, which allows Low Kicks to swap out, and as we've seen on this team, we have a good number of tools for swapping out, mostly just around Palafin. But on the other side, we have the Stab Knockoff to do good dark type damage and to get rid of opponent items, and we have the Throat Chop to get rid of sound type moves, since we are using Shed Tail on Sceptile to pass a substitute, and sound type moves can surpass substitutes, so it's nice to have the Throat Chop just in case we can Throat Chop a Primarina who technically doesn't resist it and keep it from going for a sound type move into the Pokemon that we switched in with the said Shed Tail. And lastly, we're just Terra Bug to really max that bug type damage, as the non-resisted bug type damage can really do a number into a lot of teams. But yeah, that's the basis of the team. Let's get into some battles.
So the first team that we faced here is a Whimsicott Hisuian Typhlosion team, which is very threatening, but they also have the ability to just lead Dragapult and Grimmsnarl for a lot of immediate disruption, and I'm not too afraid of Breloom, as we'll see here in a bit, because they actually do bring Breloom, and Incineroar is also not too much of a problem for this team, but we decided to lead Sceptile and Raichu, so that way I have the ability to swap either option here, as they get the Frisk out and they discover that we're Electric Seed and Focus Sash on our Pokemon, but we swap Pincurchin, and even if Whimsicott went for Tailwind here, we can still outspeed with Raichu here, and the Volt Switch is going to do about half damage, and we do get the crit, but the crit probably doesn't matter too much here because we can just swap in Politoed for the Rain, and they set up the Sunny Day here, but I get the Sucker Punch with Pincurchin into Hisuian Typhlosion, as I predicted that they would Sunny Day, so I went for the Fire Weather Ball into Whimsicott, and Whimsicott is actually Agua Berry, which is a bit of a strange choice. We protect Politoed here because I thought a Grass type move would come out into it, as they tried to Spore into the Politoed, which leads me to believe that they do not know how Electric Terrain works, and we get a bit of a lucky pair there, and they try Sporing Pincurchin, and then Dazzling Gleam, and the Fire Weather Ball comes out and just directly KOs Breloom, as the Thunderbolt is going to pick up KO on Whimsicott, and with that, the opponent has decided to not reveal whatever their last Pokemon was. So we did get lucky a bit during this game, but overall just a really solid Pincurchin game there, because we really didn't need the luck that we got. So here the opponent has the ability to just start with Grassy Glide spam by starting Rillaboom and Serena, but they also have Gardevoir, which makes me think that they want to do some weird, like, Choice Scarf Gardevoir shenanigans, as they have Garchomp for the Earthquake, so the Telepathy on Gardevoir can just avoid the Earthquake, and the two damage dealers in Toxtricity and Ceruledge can be kind of hard for us to remove since we don't really have Ground-type damage on our team. But they decide to lead Garchomp and Serena here, which I am perfectly fine with. We can't first impression Serena because it has the priority negation, so we're going to take the Rock Slide here. And thankfully, Lokix does not get flinched by the Rock Slide, so we just get to U-turn out into our hero form Palafin, as Palafin came back and then came back out onto the field. And Palafin is really threatened by Rillaboom, so I didn't want to get hit by it this turn. And we go for the Shed Tail in with Sceptile, and that allows us to bring in Lokix. And Lokix is going to take the Dragon Claw, which is immediately going to break that Shed Tail. But now we can just first impression the Rillaboom since they can't Grassy Glide Palafin, and I just decided Terra Water to do damage into Garchomp. But Garchomp actually takes it surprisingly well and just goes for the Rock Slide, which is going to KO Lokix, but at first impression, so we're going to have to swap it out anyways. As now we can bring back in Sceptile, and they reveal Toxtricity to be their last Pokemon, and they immediately Terra Normal, which is good because I protected Palafin since I wanted to see what they would do. As I Leaf Blade into Garchomp just to try and get good grass type damage on the terrain, but the Boom Burst is going to take out Sceptile, and we have to reveal that our last Pokemon in the back is the Politoed, and at this point we can wrap up the game pretty safely. We just need to dodge Rock Slide Flinch, and they do crit Palafin here, but Palafin gets the close combat into Toxtricity, which is the one that really mattered here. Even if they flinched Politoed, it would take them a long time to KO Politoed with the Rock Slides, and now that we have the rain up, it's easier for us to just go for the 2 Jet Punches into the Garchomp. Here we have a pretty big rain, like all these components kind of depend on rain, at least in some way, except for Incineroar, but Incineroar is Incineroar. So they immediately decide to lead their Pelipper and Toxicroak for the rain components as we get Raichu and Palafin in, and I decided to protect Raichu and just double protect because I thought Toxtricity or Toxicroak would fake out into either Pokemon, and I kind of wanted to see if maybe they would throw a Hurricane into Palafin here, but we get the Expanding Force in the Toxicroak, and that's just gonna one-hit KO it, as they decide to Hurricane into Raichu for whatever reason, which does cause Raichu to take Hurricane damage, but we get the Sucker Punch Pelipper, and we're faster than it because we're currently Surge Surfer, even though they set up the Tailwind, which allows us to KO Pelipper, as Lokix is just going to take the Draco Meteor, but because they only have 2 Pokemon left, they can't get rid of that Draco drop on the Archaludon, as we're just going to double protect here in order to stall out their Tailwind, but more importantly, they're only going to have 1 turn of rain left after this next turn ends. So we swap in Alolan Raichu here to hopefully catch an Electro Shot, as they lax respects into Pincurchin, rightly leading that Pincurchin is the threat, as neutral Electro Shot isn't going to be able to KO Raichu, and now I can bring in Palafin, and Volt Switch is going to be able to KO Basket Legion, and Close Combat is not going to be able to KO our Archaludon, but they currently cannot use Electro Shot since we are outside of rain, so they really don't have a great way of KOing Palafin unless they just full on went for that Draco Meteor, but we can wrap up the game here with our second Close Combat. Here we have pretty much entirely reliant on heavy Trick Room setup, except they do have Hisuian Zoroark, who is kind of concerning because it can really mess our starting lead. However, if they lead in DD and Psychic Terrain goes up, that means that that's not Zoroark. So our play here is pretty much always going to be leading low kicks, so that low kicks can work on hitting the Indeedee, and we also lead Palafin just so we can have Palafin for later, but we swap out Pincurchin here in order to get rid of the Psychic Terrain with our Electric Terrain, which means that we could have just full on first impression the Indeedee, but the Indeedee immediately decides to Terra Grass, and I went for the Throat Chop because I thought it was a bit more of a safe option. But I feel like Terra Grassing in front of a bug type is definitely a play of all time. But because of this, they get to keep both Mons here, which is a little unfortunate, as we're going to bring in Politoed to hopefully catch a Fire-type move on the Armarouge, and I decided to protect Pincurchin just in case they were going to go for just like Expanding Force. They can't use the double Expanding Force right now because we're not on the Psychic Terrain, but we do catch the Armor Cannon, which is good, as they decide to Helping Hand with Armarouge again, and we Sucker Punch with Pincurchin just to do a little bit of damage into them as the Expanding Force comes out, and the Ice Beam isn't able to KO Indeedee, but they go for the Helping Hand again, and this time, perhaps seeing that there might be a redirection, I just decided to Thunderbolt with Pincurchin and get that Weather Ball into Armarouge as Politoed hangs on from the second Expanding Force. Now it is Ursaluna and Torkoal in the back, and they get to set up their Sun, but we can just bring in Lokix here, who I'm pretty okay with dying at this point. But they actually don't kill Lokix, which is
kind of awkward, and they also get off a substitute with Ursaluna. But now we're outside Trick Room, and the game is pretty much over because we can just bring in Politoed, and even if Politoed dies, our end game is just Palafin. So as long as we break that substitute at some point in the game, Palafin will just clean up super easily. And they facade into Pincurchin because we U-turned out, but that also means that they take Rocky Helmet damage, and now the game is super over because we can use our Terra Water Palafin in order to take out Ursaluna, and we can use Politoed's Weather Ball in order to take out Torkoal, and I would be willing to bet that that crit did not matter. Okay, here we have a bunch of unusual pieces, as they have Hisuian Braviary, but no Psychic Terrain, and they also have 2 Water starters that are not considered to generally be good. But I'm curious as to what this team is cooking up, so I decided to lead Raichu and Palafin, as we often do, and they decide to lead Golgango and Greninja. We swap in Pincurchin so that Raichu can immediately get faster than Greninja, guaranteed, unless Greninja's Choice Scarf, and even then we might still be outspeeding Greninja. But they just decided to Power Gem into Palafin as Greninja got knocked down 1 hit, and we Jet Punch Goldango, as I thought Amoonguss might go for the Spore here, but Goldango just decides to go for the Make It Rain, and Amoonguss actually reveals that it's Giga Drain, so Palafin unfortunately is going to go down here, but Pincurchin gets to take out the Goldango with Pincurchin Blast, as Amoonguss reveals that it's Terra Poison, and we deal decent Psychic type damage into it, as they deal pretty good Poison type damage into us with Sludge Bomb. But now we have Politoed in the back, and they decide to not redirect an attack, so we just get to Volt Switch down that Water type, and 2 Weather Balls is going to be enough if Amoonguss doesn't get too much HP back from its Giga Drain, but Expanding Force and Weather Ball combo is going to be able to deal with Amoonguss. And lastly, we have a team here that seems to be mostly comprised of Perish Trap, but also side procking the Archaludon's defense boost, and then using Flamigo in order to copy those defense boosts. So we decided to lead Lokix and Palafin, as we can... Lokix definitely has the ability to swap out, but if they didn't lead Gothitelle, that means we could also have Palafin swap out. But it's also possible in their heads that they think that Palafin has Flip Turn, which would allow us to get out of this scenario. And I immediately decide to lock that Terra Bug on Lokix to deal a lot of Bug-type damage into Archaludon. And Archaludon, who's usually a physical Togemon, takes nearly half from that quote-unquote resisted U-turn there, as Lokix is allowed to get out. And I kind of wish that I attacked into Gothitelle, just so we could swap out Palafin next turn, but now we're going to bring in Raichu here, and I want the Raichu in order to hit the Archaludon, and we don't have too much use for Palafin here anymore, honestly, since it lost so much health, and it doesn't really help us that much in the end game. Draco Meteor is going to do damage into Lokix, as Psychic is going to finish off Palafin, but now we can bring back in Raichu, and I just decided to first impression Gothitelle because I really don't want to have to deal with it, as Expanding Force is slowly chipping down Archaludon for what health we can take off it, and Lokix lives the Draco Meteor while the Archaludon is super dropped, which is nice, but now we get to swap out into Pincurchin, and we're going to nuzzle the mouse hole just because I wanted to make it slow to make it easier to deal with, and I figured that they would do something to try and get rid of the Lokix. But we Volt Switch into Mouse Hold, which is going to cause Lokix to come back, and they're trying to take Pincurchin, as the Pop Bomb is able to take out the Lokix, but Pincurchin takes down Mouse Hold with Pincurchin Blast, and now it is Raichu and Pincurchin versus Archaludon Flamigo, and they're actually scrappy Flamigo, which I don't think changes too much anything, because we can just double target down the Archaludon with the Electric Terrain boost. We are definitely able to do that, and we can next turn use our Super Speed in order to Sucker Punch and Volt Switch down the Flamigo. So yeah, that was the Alolan Raichu Pincurchin team. I think it definitely has a lot of surprise factor for your opponent, because once you swap in the Pincurchin while Alolan Raichu is on the field, you have a lot of manipulability, because you can just Volt Switch back out into the full form Palafin, and whenever you swap out, you're going to do a lot of electric type damage to your opponent, which is pretty, it feels like it's pretty hard to get in this format outside of like Electro Shot. But thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked it, maybe consider leaving a like on the video, and even consider subscribing, because both of those things will help me out an absolute tonnage, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you.